Hello, Tosh Jr. here with a video book review of The Sonic Boom: How Sound Transforms the Way We Think, Feel, and Buy, written by Joel Beckerman with Tyler Gray and published in 2014. Now, in this book, The Sonic Boom, Joel Beckerman really explains how marketers and businesses can use sound to influence customers' perceptions and behavior. And the overarching theme of the book is really about sonic branding and how you can really achieve tangible effects with strategic uses of sound. The book starts with discussing actually the neurology and the physiology of sound and just how physically sound works to create an experience for a user. And then it also delves into the psychology and the sociology of sound and how those all can be sort of mixed and effectively used in marketing and many other aspects to create an impact. The book really starts after it discusses the neurology and physiology, the concept of what the author calls the sonic boom, and or more specifically, what he calls a boom moment. And the author describes that as a moment when sounds are used to rope in other senses, spark memories, and most importantly, elicit feelings. Really, it's really about making you feel something with sound. The Washington Independent Review actually described the boo moment as the right sound being played at the right time, creating an emotional connection with a listener. And that really sums up the overarching theme of the tale here of the book. Um, it also discusses sonic landscapes and really creating, pictures with sound and really evoking feelings and a whole atmosphere and a whole experience around sound. I really agree with many of the tenets that this book sort of puts forward. CBS News actually says that 10 of the 15 most valuable global brands have invested in sonic branding as part of their marketing strategy. And I find that that's not surprising when you think about the companies that do sonic branding very well and then some that don't do it so well at all. But I agree because there are lots of sort of relatable examples that the book really provides, and I could really supplement that with my own experiences actually with sound. And if you think about sound, sound can be very calming. For example, one of the examples that is given is the sound of a Mac booting. When you think about a Macintosh computer or a laptop, it makes this sort of, if you ever heard it, this very sort of Zen-like sound, as the author calls it. And that's supposed to be very soothing, especially after you've had a laptop crash, which can be one of the most sort of stressful situations. So that very chimey, sort of calming sound really helps to cool someone down, if you will. If you also think about the slot machines in Las Vegas, they're always chinging. They make very happy sounds. They almost always sound like there is money coming from them, even when there isn't. But sound can also alternatively be very disturbing or fill you with dread. If you think about films like Jaws or Psycho, when you look at the Jaws movie and you hear that boom, boom, you really feel that dread. You feel that sense that something is coming. It can really scare you. Psycho, very similarly, if you think about that shower scene with those high pitched strings, that really, without that sound, that really just adds to heighten the experience. And so it becomes very relatable when you think about it in your everyday life and how you can really use sound to maximum effect in a lot of different ways. There's some companies that really get this right. When you think about companies like Disney, for example, and this is an example that's given in the book about how they create these sound landscapes where, if you're walking through a land that is supposed to be very forest-like, you will often hear birds chirping or you may hear wind rustling through trees to create this sort of calm forest environment. As opposed to if you go to, let's say, the Main Street USA part of the theme park, it's very sort of carnival like, and you hear lots of ragtime music, perhaps from the 20s, and just the sounds that are created in the park just create these different feels that, out of place don't really work well. It wouldn't work to hear a forest sound in, for example, the Land of Tomorrow, for example, at Disney, where it's really all about futuristic. And so the sounds that are created in that park are much different than the sounds that are created on Main Street USA or in a forest, for example. There are some companies that actually get this very wrong as well. Sun Chips is one of the examples given in the book where they created a biodegradable bag for their chips, for their product, and the bag was so loud and so noisy that consumers actually started creating parody videos around it because it was just the sound just was so horrid that no one ever got to the actual product. No matter how good the product was, the sound of that bag was just so horrific. And then there are some companies that are just not using their sound to their full potential. Although they may spend billions of dollars, in the case of McDonald's, for example, they spend millions and millions of dollars on their marketing and their jingle. I'm loving it. And you've probably heard that lots of times throughout lots of commercials and all the marketing that McDonald's does, but they don't fully utilize the sound or their sonic logo, if you will, the same way that they probably could by pumping the music through the stores, for example. And if you think about the way that you shop, even when you go to a Gap store, for example, there's usually lots of upbeat music, sort of hip hoppy. They're really addressing the millennial generation that they're selling to, as opposed to if you go to a Brooks Brothers, for example, much more upscale. Probably catering to a more mature audience, a wealthier audience, and so you're more likely to hear classical music, perhaps Mozart or Bach, in a Brooks Brothers store that's designed for you to sort of lounge, as opposed to a Gap store where you're sort of looking to shop very quickly for someone younger. You don't want to really lounge in a Gap. You kind of look around very sort of casually and shop very casually. For the most part, I have to say again that I agree with a lot of the things put forward in this book. I've got some personal examples where I have a Samsung TV, and they've built a great sonic identity into their product. When the Samsung TV turns on or off, there's a specific chime that plays, and it's very unique to Samsung. So anytime you hear that chime, you know that there is a Samsung TV being turned on or off. And it also gives you an auditory symbol that the TV actually is working and that the power button works when you press the button on the remote. If you also think about just back to your childhood, think about the sound of an ice cream truck and just the memories that that evokes. The memories evokes these happy memories of childhood, etc. And so even to this day, when you hear that sound, it really just really immediately takes you back to those childlike days. Or also think about iconic films like Star Wars, where when you hear that sound, the theme music to that movie, Star Wars or Indiana Jones, even those are very iconic sounds. And so when you hear those sounds, you instantly think of adventure. You think of that time where you were watching the movie and you were just lost in the story. And even soundtracks have become popular in their own right. Soundtracks to movies like Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, and Good Morning Vietnam have become so integrated into the film and into the experience that the soundtracks themselves became bestsellers. In addition, the song Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, you can't hear that song and not think about Vietnam. It just evokes that same era, that same feeling. And so marketers and companies can really use these tenets and these principles to really brand their products in a new way and really make a mark and an impact. One interesting concept that I found in the book was this notion of what the author calls sonic trash. And that is defined as a disregard for sound in storytelling or sound inserted into the wrong place or in the wrong context. For example, Nike in the 80s started using the Beatles song Revolution in their commercials. And the Beatles fans and the Beatles themselves were very outraged by this. It just was incongruous to hear a Beatles song being used in that way. It felt very fake. And so Beatles fans really rebelled, and Nike ended up pulling the ads. Similarly, the Royal Caribbean cruise line used Iggy Pop's Lust for Life in part of their commercials. Now, that song, although it creates this sort of sense of excitement in the song, just the feeling of the song, but the lyrics of the song were very controversial and not really something that Royal Caribbean really wanted to be associated with. And so it really felt, again, very sort of fake and didn't feel authentic. And so they eventually pulled those ads. Now, one thing I do like about the book is there's lots of stories and anecdotes to really illustrate the point about how sound can really make an impact. But I felt the anecdotes sometimes could go overly long, and they started to feel a little bit repetitive. Um, Randy Sepich, in his review, says, that in the Washington Independent, said that one too long ended about anecdote about creating an anthem for AT&T describes a breakthrough moment where the addition of bagpipes somehow helped capture a new layer of AT&T, and it just felt like they almost devoted a whole chapter on this book on AT&T. and it was just it felt a little bit unnecessary. And so there were a lot of those kind of anecdotes where they just kind of go overly long, and I think really over explain the point, put too fine a point on it, on the point, if you will. Um, there's also a little bit of criticism that you have to, or John DeStyle you have to use when you look at this book, because the author actually owns a company that creates and produces these auditory signatures for companies. And so sometimes it feels like the author is almost patting himself on the back, tuning his own horn, and really sort of marketing himself and his services. One example that comes to mind is when he talks about McDonald's, as I mentioned earlier, not using their full landscape. It really feels almost like an advertisement for himself, and he's sort of begging McDonald's to call him to help him with their Sonic logo, if you will. There's also another interesting thing about the book where he talks about how online music providers like Spotify and Pandora are really collecting data about the things that we listen to and are using those, will eventually start to use them to customize sounds to things we like. And so all of that data, all that metadata, you can imagine, is very valuable for companies because they will really start to understand our listening patterns, the kinds of sounds we like, and then start to develop products and marketing strategies around them. Um, One of the other things that is, I think, a little bit of a criticism in this book, and Shannon Bond in the Financial Times wrote about this as well, that you know the author seems to think that the Sonic logo should be sort of heard ubiquitously, I kind of disagree with that, and Shannon Bond did as well. I think too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing, and so although the McDonald's logo is very distinctive, I don't want to hear it every time I go to a McDonald's store or every time I hear a commercial. I don't want to hear that same logo. And so there could be a little bit of overkill. So I do think you have to be somewhat strategic about how you use these sounds. But I do agree with the tenets of the book. And I think an auditory logo and an auditory soundscape and a sonic market can really help boost your logo, boost your brand, and make you memorable. And so, overall, I think it's a great book, very informative. I think companies really should pay attention to it and take some of these tenets to heart and really start to use them. Overall, a fantastic book, and I recommend it to everyone. Thank you very much.